Okay friends, one of the first things we have to do to get started on our job is to safely raise and support the truck so the rear wheels are off the ground. After that, we're going to remove all 5 of our lug nuts and then the wheel. Okay, now with the wheel off of there, we want to follow our brake line to where it connects onto the wheel cylinder. Spray that down with some penetrant. We'll let that sit, and now we're going to move down here. Remove this protective boot. Behind that is going to expose your adjuster for your brakes. Now I'm going to take this pick and I'm going to put it right in there. Essentially what I'm feeling for is the pin that hits up against the adjuster. That's the adjuster lever. Once I'm on it and pressing towards me, I'm just going to use a tool that I can reach inside with, screwdriver, pry bar, brake spoon, whatever you've got. And we're just going to take this and we're going to turn that star adjuster that's on the inside. Once you have it de-adjusted, remove your drum. Now with the drum off of there, we have a nice clear view of our wheel cylinder right here. Obviously, it's buried behind a few things here, so just take a quick peek or even draw a diagram. You want to pay attention to the direction that the springs all go in. Of course, we're going to be taking most of this apart, so you don't want to misplace anything during the installation process. After that, I'm going to use a tool that looks like this. You can use whatever you've got, but essentially I'm going to get around this spring and remove it from this piton right there. Just going to set that aside. Now we're going to move along to the bottom. We're just going to lift up on this. That's going to give us some slack on this cable and remove that as well. Now we can grab onto our shoes and carefully separate them. At this point, we can grab these, carefully pull them out of there, and inspect them. You want to make sure that they're in good condition. If it looks like they're rusted or rotted or damaged in any way, obviously it's something that you're going to want to deal with. The next thing you're going to want is some hose clamp pliers. We're going to go right along the center flex hose here. That's going to pinch off / restrict the fluid from getting down to the wheel cylinder. Now once you have the fluid restricted, let's continue on by removing the line from the back of the wheel cylinder. If you find when you're using a wrench that the bleeder screw right here is in the way, just go ahead and get it right out of the way. Let's see. All right. Okay, we'll set that line aside. Now the next thing we want to do is remove our 2 mounting bolts that hold the wheel cylinder to the backing plate. There's one of the bolts. Go ahead and do the other. Now from the outward side, we want to go ahead and take this right out of here, but you're going to notice that it's stuck in there. Just go ahead and use a hammer, or maybe even a pry bar, and separate it, and then remove it. I'm going to turn this so no fluid gets on my brake shoes. There it is, friends. Okay, now with that out of there, we want to make sure that we have our brake line out of the way. What we're going to do is just take something that we can scrape along the outside here. Essentially what we want to do is just get off any of this debris that might be located in the area. Obviously, if we leave something on there, it might make it so the wheel cylinder isn't necessarily seated properly. Also, any of this stuff right here could fall inside the drum, which of course is going to cause some noise when your shoes hit up against it. Next, we're going to make sure we clean up our mounting bolts as well. You want to make sure that the threaded area is nice and clean. Okay, now it's time to install our brand new wheel cylinder. Obviously, you want to have the fitting facing up, the line on the bottom area. You want to line these tool holes up with the back of the backing plate. Slide it right in there. Okay, once you have it lined up, let's just take the 2 bolts, start them in, and then we'll snug them up and torque them to 11 foot-pounds. Once you have that in and tightened, let's continue on by putting on the line. You want to make sure that you start this in by hand because you definitely don't want to cross thread it in. Okay, so now I bottomed it out. The next thing you would want to do is torque this to 13 foot-pounds. If this isn't something that you feel comfortable torquing, just go ahead and bottom it out and then just snug it another quarter turn. That's going to help make sure that the line's seated with the wheel cylinder. After that, you just want to double check your line and make sure that it didn't potentially move and rub up against anything. If there's any areas that are rubbing, obviously that's going to be an issue. Now, something that I like to do is just use a little bit of caliper grease inside the ports where these are going to go into the wheel cylinder. This is just going to help lubricate things and keep them moving around. We'll take this little piton, we're going to slide it right in. Do the same to the other side. Now at this point, you want to make sure that you have these turned so the slot is facing straight up and down so it's going to be able to fit around that shoe. Once you have it to that point, go ahead and put the shoe into the area. Slide that in. Now we're going to do the same to the other shoe. As you bring this in, you want to make sure that you have this rod that comes underneath the wheel cylinder situated perfectly. It needs to fit up along here and it needs to have the spring in the right area. Also check the other side. You want to make sure it's sitting in the slot down around here. Once you're sure it looks good, go ahead and slide the shoes in. Now we're going to start dealing with the slack adjuster cable. For that, you want to make sure it comes down and around this hook right here. If it looks like it's ready to fall out, make sure it's in there right. After that, you're going to bring it up and around this groove. Once you have it around there, we're going to bring it right up and over this. But pay attention to it. You're going to see that it has a flat side and a side that has the line that comes up through it. We want the flat side facing right up against this. Now at this point, you're going to find that you don't have enough slack. Just come right down here. We're going to lift up on this, and that's going to give us exactly what we need up top. Bring that back down. Now it's going to be time to install our forward spring. I'm just going to take this tool right here, come through the spring, and then right up against this piton. Now I'm going to gently bring this up, but be careful because it is under spring tension, and if it falls off, well, I don't want you to get hurt. Now let's do the same to the rearward spring. Obviously, you don't want to leave your springs looking like this. That's very dangerous. Now at this point, I want to move along to just kind of squeezing these down a little bit. I don't like leaving them up so it looks as though they're ready to fall off. Inspect everything. Make sure your springs are sitting properly. You want to make sure that your rearward spring is over the top of everything right here. You want to make sure that the bar is sitting in where it needs to be, and of course the adjuster and everything else didn't fall out of place. Once everything looks good, you also want to look to see if you have any debris that might have made its way on along the shoes here. You want to make sure you get any of that out, that way there when you're driving down the road, you don't have any rust flakes falling in between the shoes and the drums and causing an issue. Okay, we're nearing the end here, but before we go ahead and put the drum on, we want to pay attention to the mating surfaces. You have the axle right here, and of course the back side of the drum. Those two areas are going to be touching up against each other. Make sure there's no rust or rot or anything that might make this so it's not sitting perfectly up against the axle. Once you have it cleaned down, just spray on a little bit of copper never sees. That'll help it come off in the future. Okay, now that the drum's on there, the next thing that we're going to need to do is adjust the rear brakes. You definitely don't want to skip this step. To adjust these, what you want to do is try to get the shoes that you have on the inside of here as close to the drum as you can without actually having it physically touching. So of course, if you had it so it's dragging, you can imagine this is going to be spinning and causing a lot of friction, which of course is going to lead to a brake pulsation and brake damage overall. To adjust it, we're just going to make sure that we have it completely up against the axle all the way, not kinked in any way. If it's at an angle, you're not going to get a good adjustment. After that, we're going to come along the back and access the adjustment port. Now, before we go ahead and start sticking anything in there to adjust it, this is going to be an audible type of thing. So essentially, we want to be listening as I spin this. I can hear a very little bit of noise right there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and adjust this so that I hear more noise. Essentially, that's going to mean that the shoes are going to be touching up against the drum. Once we've done that, we'll continue. Okay, so at this point, I've adjusted it a little bit too far. I've got a little bit of noise going on there, but also when I try to turn it in one direction or the other, it feels really stiff. Once you have it to that point where it doesn't seem like it wants to turn, that's telling you that now you need to de-adjust it. As we start to de-adjust it though, we're only going to go a couple clicks at a time, so just tiny movements, and we're going to keep checking it. Like I said before, this is very important. You want to make sure that you don't have the shoes over-adjusted so they're touching up against your drum. Okay, so now I'm at the point where it spins freely. I hear barely any drag, if any. That feels pretty great, if you ask me. Let's go ahead and pump up the brake. This is going to help situate those shoes as well. Once you're sure it's properly adjusted, go ahead and install your rubber boot. Okay, now that we have everything adjusted, the next thing that we're going to want to do is get ready to bleed the brakes. Of course, we want to take off our restriction pliers up here. And then the next thing that we're going to do is just open up the bleeder screw along the back right there and wait for a slow trickle of fluid to come out. After that, we'll close it off and get ready to manually bleed the brakes. Let's come right over here to the driver's side. We're going to remove that cap, and then we're going to top it off with .3 brake fluid. Once it's full, make sure that you reinstall your cap. Okay, so now that we have a steady trickle of fluid coming out of here, I'm just going to close it off, and then I'm going to grab a second person, and we're going to do a manual bleed. Okay, so now that we checked the master cylinder to make sure it was full, the next thing we're going to do is have the person up inside the truck go ahead and pump the brake pedal slowly 3 times. On the 3rd time, they're going to hold the pedal as tight as they can, and they're going to let me know they're holding. Go ahead and pump. Now that he's holding, the next thing that I want to do is go ahead and open this up. I want to see what's coming out of it. Essentially, all we want is fluid. If you see any little spurts of air coming out of there, that means you have air in the system and you need to continue. All right. Remarkably, the first time looked great, but we're going to do it at least one more time just to ensure we have no air in the system. Go ahead and pump it. Okay. Now that was 2 times in a row I saw that there was no air coming out of this. I feel confident that there's no air in my braking system. At this point, I'm going to make sure that both of these are nice and tight. We'll clean up our mess, and then of course we're going to put on our bleeder screw cover. Once the brakes are bled, go ahead and come back up here and double check your master cylinder. Okay friends, so we just finished replacing our wheel cylinder. It was fairly easy. What's left to do now? You're going to want to take your truck for a road test. While you're driving it, make sure that you don't feel any brakes dragging. You don't smell any weird smoke coming from the back. That would essentially mean that you over-tightened or over-adjusted your rear brakes. Other than that, take a peek underneath there when you're done your road test and just make sure that you don't have any fluid dripping down. If you do, it's probably from the line, and you want to make sure that you go ahead and snug that up and then re-bleed your brakes at the end.